I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interviews with Anthony Brown and Michael Peroutka for Maryland Attorney General and Brooke Lierman for Maryland Comptroller. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics. If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates. Rather than ask them how they stand on a multitude of issues, these conversations try to get to the character of the candidate. General elections are now a few weeks away on November 8th. And in this episode, we bring you three statewide candidates, Republican Michael Peroutka and Democrat Anthony Brown, who are running for Maryland Attorney General, and Democrat Brooke Lierman, who is running for Maryland Comptroller. Lierman's opponent, Republican Barry Glassman, did not respond to interview requests. Three long-form interviews makes for a long episode. The advantage is you get a head-to-head comparison, but if you want to skip around, look in the show notes for the timestamps for each candidate. The interviews appear as I recorded them. Music for this episode comes from Bethesda singer-songwriter Dara Blecher, who is a 9th grade student at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in Rockville.
How did you move on so fast? Did you ever care to ask if I've lost my mind? I do so many things to make you mine. Why did you have to go away? I'm right here crying on my bathroom floor, looking through the photographs when I was yours. Should've known that when you said you loved me.
Michael Peroutka, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate it very much, Sunil. Thanks for your hospitality.
I want to know a little bit about you so you could tell the listeners about, where you live, what you do, what you've been doing, why you think you're qualified to run for Attorney General.
Well, thank you. I'm a lifelong Maryland resident. I grew up in eastern Baltimore County, over in the Essex Middle River area. And I attended Loyola University. It was Loyola College then here, and University of Baltimore Law School. And I've been a practicing attorney, actually retired now, for about 30 years, along with my brother, was my law partner. During that time, about 25 years ago, became very interested in the United States Constitution and the Maryland Constitution. Actually, the whole thing grew out of our own ignorance. We realized that although we had taken an oath to these documents, we didn't really know them like we should. So it started kind of an odyssey, if you will. And we brought together some people, we put together some materials and started studying the United States Constitution. Well, that fast forward 20 years and our materials have been used all over the country. And the organization is called the Institute on the Constitution. And so that has given me an interest and a background in both the Maryland and the United States Constitutions. I served on the Anne Arundel County Council from 2014 to 2018. I was the chairman in 2018. And so I got a glimpse of what local politics and encompasses. And I'm running for Attorney General because I believe that we have been through 2.5 years of a health crisis, and I kind of put air quotes around that, if you will, because a health crisis has been used, I believe, to as a background, if not an excuse, to deny Marylanders the exercise of their God-given and constitutionally protected rights, including the right to practice religion, the right to worship, the right to assemble, the right to have autonomy over your own body, et cetera, the right to run a business. All these things were interfered with. in a very notorious and complete and obnoxious way by our governor and by our county executives and by many health department officials. Now, the excuse they used for that, or the reasoning, was that we had this emergency. We had this catastrophic health crisis. I don't believe that we did have I don't think the evidence has shown that we had. I'm not saying nobody ever got sick from a virus, but I don't think we had a catastrophic emergency that called for what called for the steps that were taken. And in fact, the steps that were taken, even if there was a health emergency, were not constitutional.
What kind of law did you practice?
We had a general practice in Maryland, a little bit of everything. We had a specialization in creditors' rights. And I don't think you're supposed to say specialization. We had a concentration.
I want to ask you what you think are the issues in your election for Maryland Attorney General.
I believe that this violation of the rights that I've already talked about a little bit is central to that. I think people who've lost their livelihood or many people lost loved ones. Many people couldn't even visit their loved ones while they were dying, actually, in nursing homes, et cetera. People were robbed of their liberty, and so I think that's a huge issue and requires redress. Also, I believe that there is a overriding agenda that really amounts to a war against America and a war against our Constitution that's going on now. Also, being able to defend yourself. So the Second Amendment is a crucial part of my campaign. I believe that the Second Amendment has been violated for years and years, and our right to keep and bear arms has been violated with what people sometimes call common sense gun control or whatever. And I believe that that's not lawful or actually sensible. I'm also very pro-life. I believe that the government has a duty to protect life, both preborn infants and also at the end of stages at the end of life. I also believe that we have to defend our country's borders. We have horrible border problems that need to be addressed, and I also believe that unless we can guarantee election integrity, we don't have. If we don't have borders and you don't have open and free and transparent elections, I really think you don't have a country. So these are some of the issues that I think are paramount right now.
Okay, so these are all national issues. They are not particularly Maryland issues. They may be Maryland issues, but you're running to be Maryland Attorney General. So can you tell me, for example, how the war against America, right, is an issue in Maryland? What is Maryland specific about that complaint? Well,
I believe that the agents and agencies of our government in Maryland and nationally and locally have actually been infiltrated.
I'm not talking about other states now. In Maryland, what evidence do you have of government institutions being infiltrated, and by whom?
Well, let's just start with the governor. The governor of Maryland, I believe his allegiance is very questionable because he has attended I guess a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago with the World Economic Forum. He was quick to issue orders, what they called emergency orders to make it so people.
Okay, we're talking about the Republican governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I believe violated the Constitution of Maryland in many ways.
He is an example of infiltration of the government.
Well, yes, his willingness to violate this document.
But he won an election. How did he infiltrate?
The infiltration is his misuse of the police power of the state.
Is the infiltration idea valid if he actually won an election. We'll talk about abuse of power in just a minute.
You take an oath of office to live by the Constitution, and you had no intention, and you don't have any intention, and you in fact don't do that, then you have violated your oath, and that's the infiltration.
What I don't understand is, how is this infiltration?
Right. Well, it's infiltration because of the lack of fidelity to the contract. When you win an election, you can't just do anything you want.
So what is an example of what Larry Hogan did that is actually infiltration? I understand you think that he didn't keep his promise or his position on the campaign trail. Right. I understand that he did. You say that he abused power. I don't understand the infiltration proposition.
The difference is that when his misuse rises to the level of the violation of the Constitution, and there's a pattern of that behavior, and he coordinates with others and there's evidence that he's coordinating with others out to have a different agenda and a different allegiance, then regardless of the fact of whether he has been elected, he has infiltrated under false pretenses. He promised that he was going to live by this document, and then he didn't.
Larry Hogan is a popular governor of Maryland who has been reelected. And you are saying that the people that elected him didn't know what was going on, and that you have the real story. And you're going to the same people that elected him and telling them that, what you did was an error. How do you hope to win this election? Because that's whose votes you need.
In one sense, I'm saying that that's an error, but I'm really saying that the error and the misdeed is his, and it needs to be correct. I believe the Republican election demonstrated that the Republican Party was not happy with him. They didn't choose his successor, his hand-picked successor. They chose Dan Cox by a fairly substantial margin.
You were the nominee of the Constitution Party for the President of the United States.
Right.
Were you a Republican at that time?
No, I belonged to the Constitution Party.
When did you become a Republican?
Probably about 2013, 2012.
Why did you switch?
Because Republicans have ballot access. I wanted to be able to run in Maryland.
So this is a pure marriage of convenience.
Sure. Yeah. Ballot access is extremely critical. If the Constitution Party had ballot access in Maryland, I would have run as a Constitution Party, but it did not.
You went from the Constitution Party to the Republican Party as a matter of convenience to secure ballot access.
Yes, but I did. But my principles and what I believed in. If you go back and look at my campaign in 2004 and my campaign in 2022. Their principles are the same. Yes, I changed parties, but I don't see that as a violation of principle. The
Constitution Party and the Republican Party have the same principles?
No, I have the same principles.
But if you're switching your house, essentially, right, to something else that has a different principle from the house that you were in before, and yet you are willing to exist in some kind of dissonance with the Republican Party in return for ballot access, what does it say about you?
Well, I think you're misinterpreting that completely. As I suggested to you before, ballot access is something that is controlled by Democrats and Republicans. They make it very difficult for others to have ballot access. The things that I stood for, which were constitutional fidelity and the rule of law back then in 2004, are the same things I stand for now.
But I assume the Republican Party does not, because you joined the Constitution Party instead of the Republican Party, because presumably at that time, the Republican Party was not consistent with your own principles. But when you needed ballot access, you moved over to a party that is not consistent with your own principles.
No. My principles have stayed the same. And
I don't doubt at all. I think your principles have stayed the same. I don't think you have changed. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is that for convenience of ballot access, you have accepted to go into a party that you're not in agreement with.
Well, no, that's not true. I I was in agreement and have been in agreement with Republican principles and Republican platforms, but that doesn't mean that I agree with. That doesn't mean that I'll agree with every Republican about every issue.
No, that's not what I said. But you joined the Constitution Party. You chose to join the Constitution Party and not the Republican Party. Right? So that was a deliberate choice on your part, believing that the Constitution Party was more consistent with your principles than the Republican Party. And yet, when it came to ballot access, you moved from the Constitution Party to the Republican Party.
Right. Had the Republicans and Democrats allowed the Constitution Party ballot access in Maryland, I probably would have stayed there and done that, but they did not.
But that is a move of convenience, right? You should, if you were truly principled about this, then you would say that I'm going to build the Constitution Party to have the ballot access. But you said, no, I'll take the shortcut here, join the Republican Party, with whom I don't fully agree. But I will do it because it will give me. So this is a political play rather than a principle play.
Okay. I think it's a nonsense point, but I don't see any point in going. I don't think I'm going to convince you otherwise.
You said that the health crisis, there was no health crisis, and that it was used by governments to take away liberty.
Essentially, yeah. I didn't say that there was no health crisis. I said there was no catastrophic health crisis.
How do you define catastrophic?
Well, actually, there's no need to, because however you can define it any way you want. But what I'm saying is that it was that the CDC, for example, has changed a lot of. They've now admitted a lot of the things that they said were not scientific and they were just matters of convenience. They didn't have any peer review or any studies that would have dictated masks.
Are you contesting the death count? How many people died because of COVID in America?
The CDC counted deaths from motorcycle accidents. Yes, I do contest it. Yeah, I don't think it's accurate.
Okay. Well, how many people do you think died?
I don't know.
Then what is the basis of your contestation?
The basis of the contestation is that hospitals there's evidence that hospitals were rewarded and they were given they were incentivized. That's the word I'm looking for. They were incentivized to claim that and to count deaths as COVID related when they were not, and they did that for monetary purposes, et cetera. That's
which hospitals inflated COVID death numbers, according to you?
There's evidence that many.
Do you know any one? Name one.
Well, look, let me just say that they all did. This is a program. Do I name one?
If you have evidence of a hospital inflating COVID death numbers for financial reasons, which hospital did it?
I believe that. Well, I'm not going to name hospitals because I don't have that information. I'll get that to you.
But you made the accusation that hospitals did it generally without any basis in fact.
No, not without any basis. I said that there was evidence, and there has been reports of that.
Please tell me what the evidence is.
Well, I will point to reports, and I'll share them with you. I can't name them right now, but it's been in the news and it's been reported that hospitals were rewarded. And they were on national newscasts and local newscasts.
I don't know one hospital that inflated death counts in the way that you are suggesting. And I would actually love to know which hospital did it, because that's the head of that hospital is on my next interview.
Right. Well, I've spoken to doctors and emergency room physicians who have told me that they were.
So which hospitals?
I don't know the hospital that I can't give you hospital names right now. Other than to say that but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You're trying to make a point there.
The accusation that hospitals inflated their death rates, especially if that is in Maryland, which is where you're running for Attorney General, is a serious one. As a candidate for Maryland Attorney General, That is one heck of a accusation to make against Maryland hospitals. If that is the case, and you know that is the case, we should bring that out right now.
You want to move on to another point? We've already covered this.
You claimed that there is a war against America, right? And that you're concerned about it. What manifestation of that war do you see in Maryland?
I see. I see an attempt to ruin our economy. I see an attempt to ruin our healthcare system. I see an attempt to make our borders porous.
But Maryland's borders are porous. People can go in and out.
People have been shipped from the border through various means and to various states. People who have come across the border have been shipped to various states. That is an extension of the border problem, which affects Maryland and affects the various states. So it's not just Texas, it's not just Arizona that are the people there that are suffering from an influx of people who really amount to an invasion under Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, which that section gives the federal government the duty and the obligation to protect all the states from invasion. And if they're not doing it, then the states have to do it themselves.
Okay, let me sort of ask this in a different way. What do you think is important for Maryland voters, since you are running as the state's attorney general?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the primary issue they are concerned about is immigration violation on a border that is far away from them? Well,
now you added the word primarily, but I think it's a very important. It's critically.
What important. Is your understanding?
Because our country. Would you agree that if our country is invaded in Arizona, that one of our sister states, that does affect Maryland?
What would you do as Maryland Attorney General to address the problem in Arizona?
They're getting here in some way, in some fashion. If there are common carriers or transportation companies or whatever that are part of that, and they're colluding with the federal government to violate the Constitution, then that would be a conspiracy, and that should be investigated by the Attorney General, and a grand jury's impaneled and prosecuted if the investigation reveals that it's.
Is that a criminal accusation?
Is it a criminal? Yes.
But yes, Maryland Attorney General has very little criminal authority.
Is that right?
Correct?
No, I don't think so. The Article 5 of the Maryland Constitution gives the Attorney General a number of authorities. One of them is to, and he takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of Maryland.
Michael Peroutka, thank you for coming on I Had Politics.
It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.
You tried to hide your big surprise, and I fell for all your little stupid lies, wishing that I left you then and there. Move on and just a little. That was Republican Michael Peroutka running for Maryland Attorney General. You can find out more about him at patriots4peroutka.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at patriots4peru. PEROU1. How have I not seen all the signs while I write songs on my guitar? I'm still here sobbing on my back. Anthony Brown, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Sunil, great to be on with you once again. Post primary, different environment, same issues, same intensity. Less than 5 weeks to go until Election Day.
What do you think is the most difficult task that the new AG in Maryland is going to face?
One of the greatest challenges that we face, and the Attorney General will be front and center, are around the issues of equity.
So where do you see the equity problems most acute? mean, what domain areas or what geographical areas, how do you see the, inequities in Maryland?
Sure. We are incarcerating young Black men ages 18 to 24 at the highest rate than any other state in the nation. We have a higher percentage of Black men, Black and brown, behind bars in Maryland than any other state, including Mississippi. And so there's a real racial and ethnic disparity in our criminal justice system, because I'll never believe for a minute that somehow Black and brown members of our society in Maryland are any more, lawless or prone to offending than Black or brown people anywhere else in this country. Yet we incarcerate at the highest rate. So we've got to look at our criminal justice system and identify where is this bias? Because I believe it's bias. I think sometimes you may have overt, outright racism. I think there's a racial bias in our criminal justice system. So where does it lie? Is it with law enforcement? Is it with prosecutors? Is it with judges and juries? So we need to undertake that analysis and make sure that we're addressing it. So do
you have any tentative conclusions about where the problem lies? I mean, I understand, whether it's police or prosecutors or judges, I suppose all of them have some role in some part of it. You've been lieutenant governor here. You've served as our congressman from, one of the districts. So do you have a sense of where really the problem is?
I don't have a sense, and I wouldn't want to guess. We need to study it.
We have to study it. The study will require the authorization and support of the General Assembly and perhaps of the judicial branch in Maryland. That seems like a long-term project. I mean, how long do you think that process?
Yeah, it's not overnight. It can't happen, let's say, between November 8th and the beginning of January when the legislature
begins. Certainly not. But even, do you think that takes 2 years, 4 years? If we take a long time studying it, in the meanwhile, the problem continues. That's not an ideal. What do you think the study looks like? Can you do this as an attorney general yourself or within your office, for example?
So I think the attorney general certainly could lead that study. Our office could lead it, provided we have the resources and the cooperation, right? Because there's data that will have to be made available. A lot of it's already public. Some of it is not as public. You'd have to work with the judiciary to actually comb through files and look at race and gender and ethnicity of those who are charged and those who are indicted, those who are prosecuted, those who are convicted. You'd have to look at court records. You'd have to look at, and again, cooperate with states' attorneys for similar information. So I believe, though, there is we are in an environment today in Maryland with the leadership of Wes Moore, with the presiding officers who now have had 2 or 3 years under their belt. I think about our committee chairs, key committee chairs like Will Smith, Judicial Proceedings, Luke Clippinger, where we're certainly going to have the political will to do this. Could we do a study in a year and tee up some recommendations for January of 2024? I think we can.
Do you have a sense of what kind of legislation you will need or what kind of change of court rules?
No, I don't want to prejudge that at all.
Should this study be done as an independent commission or from within the Attorney General's office?
I'm not sure if it's significant or makes a difference, whether it's an independent commission or whether it's in the office of the Attorney General. I do like the idea of an independent commission.
I was thinking about the Kerwin Commission, for instance. Do you see a similar level of the problem and similar kind of resources being brought to bear on this bias problem in criminal justice system?
I absolutely do.
Have you talked to Will Smith or Luke Clippinger about this?
About this issue?
About an independent commission?
Well, I haven't spoken to them about the details about what it would look like. I have had conversations with everybody on the campaign trail. I have not had a kind of a carve out meeting and sat down with Luke and Will yet. But I certainly have mentioned that they have heard these words, this concern uttered by me on the campaign trail.
The other sort of time pressure that you're going to have is that crime has been growing, increasing in Maryland and nationally as well. So as, crime increases, you are going to have to sort of respond to it, though maybe you can start by clarifying what the role of the Attorney General's office is with respect to general crime in the state.
Sure. So I always start by saying that, 95%, and if it's not 95 exactly, my point being the lion's share of the crime fighting strategies and programs and initiatives are done at the local level. You've got your state's attorneys working with local law enforcement, with their mayors and county executives to make sure they're resourced, they have their strategies to fight crime based on the needs of the local community. And it may differ from county to county. The Attorney General has a role as well. We have a criminal division. Within the criminal division, there's an organized crime unit. There are other units like Medicaid, fraud, environmental crimes, the criminal appeals division. We've got the independent police investigation unit, but we got an organized crime unit. There's only 12 attorneys in the organized crime unit. I'm going to request an expansion of that unit in January from the governor and the General Assembly. The organized crime unit today focuses on trafficking for the most part, narcotics trafficking, gun trafficking, labor trafficking. But you can imagine that with 12 attorneys, okay, we're limited in that support that we can provide, the role that we can play in the crime fighting effort.
So is it your understanding then, since you want to expand the organized crime division within the Attorney General's office, is it your understanding that the type of crime that is increasing in Maryland is in fact organized crime?
Look, I'd say that crime is on the rise in so many different ways. And why do I say that? Because I'm traveling around the state and I'm talking and listening to members of different communities. So, for example, in some communities, the rise in crime that they're experiencing and that they're most concerned about are hate crimes, right? We're seeing attacks at synagogues and churches, on the campuses of historically Black colleges and universities. We've seen Islamophobia.
But would an organized crime unit be able to address hate crime? Or is there I assume that there is a different division that does that.
No, so great question. And I know, your listeners must be saying, wow, this guy's going to be asking for all these authorities. Don't they have any authorities in the Office of the Attorney General? The interesting thing is, in Maryland, the Attorney General has probably some of the fewest authorities inherent in the office than most attorneys general. You typically have to go to the General Assembly and or the governor to get the authority to do what the people of Maryland want us to do. So I will unabashedly be knocking on the door of the General Assembly saying, I need authorities. And in some cases, I need the resources to carry out that new responsibility. Hate crimes are typically brought in conjunction with an underlying crime. Okay, you bring the hate crime typically along with the underlying crime. The Attorney General can't even bring a hate crime up, as a standalone crime.
If you're going to expand the organized crime division, and it's hate crimes that is increasing, or kids carjacking, which is a lot of the increase, right? Then how does the organized crime expansion help with the actual increase in criminal activity that is not organized crime?
The organized crime unit, primarily trafficking, narcotics, drug trafficking, labor trafficking, other types of organized crime like retail theft, and we need to plus that up. Certainly that by doing that, we're going to relieve a little bit of the load off of local states' attorneys. It will give them an opportunity to pursue many other crimes. I'm not suggesting the organized crime unit is going to somehow morph into, another like a statewide state's attorney.
Okay, you mentioned juveniles, and that you're particularly impressed by ideas around fixing juvenile justice. What are the ideas you like? What do you think are the problems that they solve?
So, for example, this legislative session, the General Assembly passed essentially a prohibition on interrogating children unless they're in the presence of an attorney, or even questioning. Right, there are different levels of questioning, interrogation, custodial interrogations, and questioning. But now, if you have a child, like you can't ask questions unless they've got a parent or accompanied by, they have an attorney. There's another proposal, and I think it's very controversial. I think we ought to look at it, and I, as a general matter, support it. If you have a child who commits a misdemeanor, right? So we're not talking about a felony. We're not talking about that aggravated assault. We're certainly not talking about gun-related crimes, but we're talking about misdemeanors, maybe shoplifting. We should not be incarcerating children who commit misdemeanors. I believe that. I think we need to invest more in diversionary programs. So that doesn't mean, when I say we shouldn't incarcerate them, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be under the supervision of either the courts or the justice system. But when we put children behind bars, what we're really doing is sending them to the institution that's going to help them develop the skills to be repeat offenders. And studies, data show that. So we need to invest more resources in their educational needs, typically their mental and behavioral health needs. Sometimes there's drug and other substance abuse issues that need to be addressed. Often there's dysfunction at home. And I know for a lot of people, they're like, well, wait a second. I mean, why are we investing all this money in kids that do bad things?
A lot of people may actually ask a different question, is that we know all this. We've known all this for 20 years, or perhaps even longer, but you haven't acted upon it. So, I mean, I think the more compelling story to tell is how you may actually act upon it, because we know these things to be true.
And what it's going to take, yes, it will take additional resources. What we need to do is invest more in our children.
Do you have a sense of what have been the obstacles to doing this in the last 20 years?
I would say primarily a political will. And that's not to say that there's no goodwill in Annapolis or around the state to do right by our children. But we're talking about a significant change in the way that we're doing business. I shouldn't say business, but the way that we're treating children in our justice system. I'm confident. Look, I'm not representing that I've had a conversation with Wes Moore and he's made a commitment or not. I don't know where he stands on this. Nevertheless, I'm confident that with the Governor Moore, we're going to be able to make progress with the General Assembly, who's already demonstrated their willingness to move forward on reform efforts. I'll be leaning forward in the saddle on this.
How likely do you think Wes Moore is going to win? Pretty likely, right?
Look, here's what I say. I say, and every time I see Wes, I tell him this. I text him this every so often too. Wes, you and I know our teams, should be confident every day that we walk out of the door, but no one should be complacent.
Okay. How likely do you think you're going to win?
Look,
why I'm asking you is that it seems from the outside that you are both likely to win. At this point, I believe that there should be a conversation about what actually needs to be done in terms of policy.
Well, look, campaigns are a policy discussion, right? I've been talking about policy on the campaign. I've been at forums. I've been in debate.
We talked a little bit about the bias in the criminal justice system in Maryland. Sort of one part of it is, it's fixing how, we treat different folks. But the flip side of it is the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights and, those kinds of issues. What are your plans with respect to enforcing more standards and norms and sort of best practice behavior within police departments in Maryland?
So I think one important tool that the Attorney General should have and can use, it's It's a provision in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which I supported and voted for on Capitol Hill. It made it out of the House. Mm-hmm. It's stuck in the Senate. There's a provision in there that incentivizes attorneys general around the country to establish the authority, which might mean going to the legislature, which I've been talking a lot about in so many other ways during the time we've had together, going to the legislature, getting the authority to conduct pattern or practice investigations of police departments. What do I mean by that? If there's signs of misconduct and it suggests that there's a pattern or it's a recurring practice, we should investigate. And right now, the Attorney General doesn't have the tool to do that. Okay. And the Congress recognizes that that's a tool that attorneys general should have. Federal government, we wanted to help fund that at the state level. But even without additional funding from the federal government, as the Attorney General, I will go to the General Assembly and say, grant me that authority. And the purpose isn't to identify bad cops for prosecution. That's not the purpose. Because frankly, there could be misconduct that falls short of criminal conduct, but yet it doesn't resemble or exemplify why it is that the vast majority of men and women in blue raise their right hand to protect and serve, right? And maybe it's training, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's recruitment, something creating a culture in that police department where just, there's misconduct. So the Attorney General goes in, does an investigation, and comes back with recommendations. Say, this is what you need to do. Almost like when the Department of Justice issues a consent decree to local government. This is what you need to do. This is the time in which you need to do it. Okay, now, if during the course of the investigation, there's criminal conduct that's discovered, well, clearly you're going to have to take the appropriate action on that, which could result in a prosecution. But again, that's not what should be motivating pattern or practice investigations. What's motivating it is to support our local law enforcement, okay, in providing the very best services that they can to help improve or lift the confidence that the public has in law enforcement so that together with the community, law enforcement can better police and keep safe our community. So pattern of practice investigation is something that I will be seeking in this January 2023 legislative session that's about to start in about 4 months.
Right. Have you thought about sentencing guidelines in Maryland and how they, what they are now and what they ought to be? No,
I've got to give some more thought to that. I do. I know I've supported sentencing reform on Capitol Hill to bring greater parity in sentencing, particularly around, cocaine, crack versus powder and things like that. So certainly an advocate for sentencing reform. We should continually be looking at how we sentence people. Is it consistent with our values, our culture, the changing times? I supported a bill on Capitol also to look at sentencing reform within the military justice system. Certainly as Attorney General, work with the advocates at sentencing in Maryland. And to the extent that we need to reform sentencing, I've always been an advocate for sentencing reform, but I can't reach any conclusions, make any recommendations today, what I think needs to be done.
Anthony Brown, thank you for coming back on I Hate Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thanks, Sunil. Take care. We'll see you out there.
That was Anthony Brown running for Maryland Attorney General. You can find out more about him at anthonybrown.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Brown4MD.
And I left you then and there. Move on, I'm just a little dumb girl. You broke my heart.
Brooke Lierman, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
The last time you were on the show, you had brought up the issue of Minority Business Enterprise Program in Maryland, which is obviously a big part of our procurement system, has been for a long time. Maryland was the first state to have a preferential procurement system.
We were.
Yeah. And since we talked, there's been a report from the Department of Legislative Services that shows a precipitous decline in participation rates for the minority and women-owned businesses in Maryland. Something like, it went down from 26% in 2016 to 14% in 2020, which is the pandemic year, of course. But even in 2018, the number was 15%.
It's hugely problematic. As you said, our state, of course, is the oldest in the country. It was established in 1978. And we have not had the success that I think many of us would like to have seen. Our current participation goal is 29% of the total value of contract awards across all the state agencies. Second highest goal in the country. New York's is a little bit higher at 30%. But we have not met that goal since we enacted the law in 2013. And so that's a huge problem. And you're right, just last year or just earlier this year, DLS, the Department of Legislative Services, did a deep dive look into our MBE program and how it is working, how it is not working, and things that we can be doing better. And I will say, there's more to review in that report. It's very meaty, and I'm excited to continue to dig into it. But I've also, over the past 18 months, had dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations with minority business enterprises, right? With Black-owned architects, with Black-owned tech companies, with immigrant-owned firms who are interested in getting in, with women-owned businesses. And time again, similar challenges come up. Really bringing many of these organizations and these companies together has to be a first priority of the next comptroller, right? And I'm excited to do that, to bring many of these companies together, to look at the report, and then to identify the steps that we need to take so that we can both be meeting and exceeding that 29% goal moving forward, especially with all of this federal money coming down the pipeline, right? We have a real chance to make sure that we're building up these small businesses, building up our MBEs, and being really a national leader.
How do you understand the problem? Because in order to fix the problem, you have to have some sort of understanding of cause. What do you think is going on there? That drop off in the participation rate from 2016 to 2018, 2019, even before the pandemic, is really, really dramatic.
It is incredibly dramatic. And I think, one of the things we didn't really see in the report is an explanation of that drop off. And so it would be interesting to use the data that we have from the Board of Public Works to go back and look at contracts that were approved from before that drop off to now. But I also think, from both from the report and from talking to businesses around the state, and I'm sure that, we will continue to gather more data on what some of the challenges are. There's one sort of, it feels the whole process feels quite opaque and a little bit, and just challenging for small businesses or new businesses and new MBEs to be involved with, right? There are numerous state agencies. Every agency has its own MBE officer and procurement officer. And so it can feel overwhelming, right? To even know where to begin to be involved in state procurement. And so I think that's number one, is we don't have, we are working on a single site of entry on the state at the state level. But there's more that we can do to make it more user friendly. And I think one of the roles of the comptroller is to help be that person who can open the door, right? Who can provide information, because the comptroller has 12 offices all over the state. And so having people in those offices trained and able to go out to the communities that they serve to say, hi, here's how the procurement system works. Here's how the MBE, here are the goals that we're trying to reach on different contracts. Let me walk you through the online portal and let me show you what opportunities exist. Those offices can really help do outreach to explain the process.
There is a survey in the DLS report.
Yes.
They did survey a lot of
minority contractors.
Minority contractors, prime and both and subcontractors. So the survey shows.
They surveyed people many people who are already involved in the process, right? There are many more who aren't even involved yet. Not enough outreach is one of the things that I believe, I'm sort of saying this from memory because I don't have it in front of me, but is one of the things that they highlighted. Another challenge is the contracts are too big, right? They're huge contracts. And so many of our MBEs, which are smaller, just cannot compete against big, sort of sometimes multi-state companies, and often not Maryland companies even, because the contracts are so big. And that ends up resulting often in even just geographic discrimination too, in a way, right? So if it's a huge contract and it's sort of for the entire state, then both MBEs can't apply, and maybe the company in Garrett County also is going to be, not able to apply or not put in a competitive bid. So thinking about breaking up the contracts even geographically, or keeping them a little bit smaller and more manageable, is something to consider and something that we should be looking into. Another issue that came up quite a bit was that it takes too long to be paid. So from the time you sign on the dotted line that you're the contractor to that time that you get paid, if you're a new business or you're an MBE, you don't have the cash flow, right? You can't make it work, and the state isn't putting money out there quickly enough so that you can survive. So many people talk to me about the need for some sort of mobilization fund, a revolving loan fund, so that you could get a zero interest loan to float the company until you start getting paid, and then you'd pay it back, right? I mean, that's the sort of thing that people are looking for as well. And then can I say one final, that prime contractors work with the same MBEs, the same subs, over and over and over again. And so sort of never open up opportunities for new ones. And that sometimes primes will go to the Board of Public Works with an MBE sub, and then after being approved, will drop that MBE sub and pick up a non-MBE sub instead. And there's not enough follow-up from the Board of Public Works say, hey, no, you can't do that. Like, we approved who we approved.
If agencies are not reporting correctly changes to the contract, which is essentially what you're saying,
yes,
then
that's a really important question, but it's also completely doable, right? There is technology, there are IT systems that exist where we could have dashboard looks at all of our contracting. In fact, there are Maryland companies that build these kinds of dashboards and IT where we could follow the contracts. I mean, this is a centerpiece of how I think we should be governing, to provide more transparency to contractors, but also to the general public.
You mentioned contract size as a problem. Now, I was talking to folks that do cybersecurity in Maryland, and especially after the Baltimore hack, if you remember a couple of years ago, this has been a big issue. Cybersecurity is a big spend item in Maryland right now. And what I learned was, the way that in Maryland we do cybersecurity is often that we do it, we do some state level stuff, but a lot of the cybersecurity is done at the local agency. So MCPS in Montgomery County has its own cybersecurity system. Then, WSSC would have its own, and so we have this, at agency level, local level cybersecurity approach. And the cybersecurity experts were saying that at that level, it's very hard to get economies of scale. Right. So we have to have these statewide contracts that cover all school systems, for example, right? And then we can fix it. But we run up against the idea of contract size, not going, being an impediment for MBE enterprises. Where do you think that balance is?
One way to think about this is actually, sort of through a cooperative bidding approach. So offer procurement engagement, for instance, with Maryland counties, Baltimore City, smaller jurisdictions, and they could increase their purchasing power by working together. So the comptroller's office could invite those jurisdictions to merge their procurement bids, right, when there are shared goals and services common across their jurisdictions, like cybersecurity, and those partnerships, although they would increase the size of the contract, it might yield savings and could result in more and could result in a better product overall. But the other thing to think about is how if the comptroller's office, the cybersecurity council, which is in the governor's office, could work together to offer different sort of pre-approved or here MBEs or Maryland-based cybersecurity companies, because we have so many great cybersecurity companies in Maryland.
Do you think the comptroller's office has the ability, right, to track contracts in 70 agencies that are now covered by the MBE law, to track contracts, contract by contract, essentially piece by piece, so that you can be on top of performance within those contracts? Is that capacity exist? Is there a law to do it? What role do you think there is?
I would say it's a must. I mean, the comptroller's office is cutting the checks for every single one of those payments that is going out. That is all the money that we as taxpayers are spending. So I would say it is a must for the comptroller's office to track that money and to make sure that we are getting what we paid for, right? And to make sure that the services are meeting the needs of Marylanders. No other office is situated in the way that the comptroller's office is to be able to do that. So if the comptroller isn't doing that, then that's something that comptroller has to do. And the question is, are we doing it in a way that invites more transparency, where we can prevent fraud, where we can prevent waste, and where we can proactively ensure that we're getting best value for our dollars, and that our dollars are, working with Maryland businesses, that we're meeting all of our MBE goals, and we can track all of that. I mean, that is absolutely something that we can and must be doing from the comptroller's office moving forward.
In the DLS report, that's a lot of discussion has gone into this, tracking system issue, particularly because the only agency, it seems, that tracks contract by contract is the Maryland Department of Transportation, which has to do it because of federal law. There isn't another requirement on the agencies to do that contract by contract tracking. Would you have agencies register contracts with you then? I mean, I really am interested in that.
So what we're talking right now is this very old system that the state uses called FEMIS. I think it stands for Fiscal or Financial Management Information System, FEMIS, FMIS. This is a mainframe system that uses COBOL that the state has been using since probably shortly after I was born, right? This is the IT system that we are using right now to track contracts. It is outdated, outmoded, and totally obsolete, right? We can do so much better. And there is a feasibility study on replacing FEMIS that is in the works right now. And one of my top priorities, if I have the honor of being elected the next comptroller, is that we will create a new IT system to replace FEMIS that ensures that everyday Marylanders, as well as contractors, can have that data at their fingertips, and that the Board of Public Works, that we are able to track contracts to make sure that we are preventing waste and fraud, and that we are holding our contractors accountable, while also ensuring that our contracts are reaching Maryland companies and we're helping to meet our MBE goals.
Do you have a sense of how much it'll cost and how long it might take?
No, but the feasibility study will. It will take several years, right? Which is why we've got to start now. There is another system in the comptroller's office that is in the process of being replaced as well. That's the tax payment system called Compass, to upgrade and to update how Marylanders can pay their taxes, to create a better online experience, and how the back end, the accountants in the comptroller's office, can process those and keep track of them. That's taken several years. We need to, I believe, we need to move it along. People are working day in and day out at it, but we need additional resources to make sure that it's implemented fully and faithfully quickly. But look, these are big projects, but they have to be done, right? And we've got to make sure that when we're doing them, we do it the right way, that it's an inclusive process so that when it's fully in place, it is working for all of us for decades to come.
Okay. The other sort of surprising part from the DLS report to me was that certain kinds of agencies do much better than others. For example, MVA, the Motor Vehicles Administration, right, is at 38% participation. Mm-hmm. But education is at 3.7% participation. Right. And the state police is at 24%. There are lots of aging, which is, I'm flabbergasted by aging, which is one of the lowest participation rates.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a sense of why this variation by agency?
Well, I mean, look, I think it's, in the report, I would say in the report, what we see is that it does state them, but it doesn't give complete reasons for each one. I think, you need to look at the contracts that were awarded in the study period. And you also have to look at the priorities of the agencies. You need to look at the work that they've done, the outreach that they've done. Did they have the staff to do the outreach that needed to be done? So I think there's, all sorts of different reasons, and I don't want to speculate or cast aspersion, but I do think that there is more work to be done clearly, and that we need a leader in the comptroller's office who will ensure that we are meeting and exceeding our MBE goals moving forward.
One of the criticisms your opponent, Republican Barry Glassman, has brought up is that you are describing the role of the comptroller in an expansive way, such that it goes beyond the usual CFO role that you had mentioned. How would you respond to that?
Sure. Look, I think I've traveled around the state for 18 months to 2 years, depending on how you count. And what I hear from people is they want an elected CFO who will both think big about ensuring the fiscal success of communities and the state over the long term, but who also sweats the small stuff, right? Who understands the need to get checks out on time, to issue refunds quickly, and to update our IT so that every Marylander can pay their taxes easily and on time. So a CFO, a chief financial officer, is not just a bean counter, right? It's somebody who plays an active role in ensuring the financial resilience of the organization. And here, it's about ensuring the financial resilience of our communities and our families. And so I'm excited to be a present and proactive comptroller, one of only 3 statewide independent positions that we have in the state, to make sure that families and communities have an advocate, have somebody who's looking out for their pockets, their pocketbooks, making sure that they're doing well, and ensuring that with every contract we approve and every tax dollar we spend, we're getting best value for our dollar. That's what I'm excited to do. And I am excited to work with Marylanders around the state to do it.
Brooke Lierman, thank you for coming back on I Hate Politics.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing this.
You made me pick up all the pieces one by one.
That was Brooke Lierman running for Maryland Comptroller. You can find out more about her at brookelierman.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at Brooke E. Lierman. Lierman's opponent, Republican Barry Glassman, did not respond to requests for interview. That's all for this episode. Music for this episode comes from Bethesda singer-songwriter Dara Blecher, who is a 9th grade student at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in Rockville. I hope you listen, like, and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Your big surprise, and I fell for all your little stupid lies, wishing that you